Cool. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. How are
I
you?
know we literally just did this. No, it's totally fine. I was interested and eager to talk to you because I really enjoyed the film and I enjoyed the performance. And it feels like a movie that doesn't quite get made anymore. Like it has a sort of high concept, but it is a much smaller, indie movie, for lack of a better word. Very, very acting based. And it almost felt like something you would have seen like come out of Sundance in the 90s. It was like, there's no money, but we have an idea and we can get an actor and we're good, as opposed to, it feels like the genre evolves a lot, and this
Mhm.
sort of felt like a throwback, and I really appreciated that for some reason. So I'm just curious, like when you came across the script, what attracted you to it?
Well, maybe it rang that little 90s bell. I don't know. There was something about it that was magical to read, and it felt really like the kind of in-depth character study of an experience. It felt very internal. It was really, really profoundly moving to read. Every single time I read the script, I would cry, which doesn't happen often. Um, and it just felt weird. It felt different. Like you said, it hops between these genres. The one moment you're kind of breaking whatever, for lack of a better word, like a fourth wall, and for me, the idea of going back to the inception of a relationship with the person who your relationship is kind of imploding with, and marking those beats where it went wrong. There was something about that nostalgia, and I think it's something that I do in my own head as I kind of will go back in time and reanalyze things. The idea of exploring that in film, I think that was the thing that I found particularly interesting. Plus, I knew it would require real leaps and gymnastics and all of those things that I like to put myself into, just hellish situations, and hope that it sticks.
I like how you said it made you cry, and that doesn't happen often. I would imagine it could happen the opposite way of crying, going, "Oh, why does someone think I want to do this? Like, no, don't stop sending me these things." Or even just like with this, it moves you and you decided something you want to make. You probably don't know, when you're reading, you don't necessarily know who you're gonna co-star with, but it really is something that really requires like, okay, I'm gonna be with one person largely throughout this. So is that an exciting proposition, or is it concerning because you're worried about, I have to have chemistry with the person, or I have to make sure it's the right vibe, or is it you're excited and you trust the director to make the right choice?
I mean, this actually, Diego was attached to this before I was, so I knew
Better.
who he was,
Yeah.
and we had been friends and had looked for something to do, so that part of it was taken care of. Um, I love the idea of trusting a director, and I do ultimately trust a director, but there is that moment if you're the first person to be cast of like, oh God, I don't know. Are they
Yeah.
going to get anyone good if I'm the person in it? Or like, you kind of just general actor neurosis. But in this instance, it was a brilliant person. Thank God.
Yeah. And we were joking before we started that I'm actually accidentally wearing one of your co-stars on my chest as we talk, which is a weird vibe to send you, but you do have really good luck with your co-stars, and your chemistry with people is always very strong, even in things that don't necessarily require it, even if you're, not the focus of the film. But here you clearly are the focus of the film, and so is he. So it needs that connection. And those early scenes do a really good job of telling you sort of everything you need to know about them without, putting too fine of a melodramatic point on it. You get the sense that they have an issue, but they also clearly have a love, and that's, the majority of relationships that are
Yeah.
out there. So there's something very authentic that's there right at the beginning. So like, how much of that is on the page, and how much do you have to sort of bring out in figuring out the character with him?
I think a lot of it was on the page, and what we probably responded to was the authenticity of that. I think so many times you see a new couple with a baby, and it's so peachy and rosy, and Diego and I both have kids, and the first year of that experience is really challenging. I think it's hard on relationships, it's hard on, personal sleep deprivation, and it's an insane shift for anybody. And the most beautiful thing that can happen, but also intense. And I think we both probably responded quite well to that, to the truthfulness of it. We spent about a week before we started shooting breaking down the script together with Tara, our director, and that became really personal. That room was like a ginormous therapy session with the three of us, and And I think the unguarded nature in which, I mean, Diego is just the most open, unguarded person. I have zero filter.
Mm.
So in the conversations around the dissolution of relationships in the past, or loss or grief or death, whatever the themes are that this movie deals with, everybody got very personal. So I think when we went into it, we were kind of cracked open, and that was a brilliant move of Tara's. And it needed it. It was technically really challenging. We needed to understand those shifts that are kind of interscene shifts between past, present. It's time bending weirdness. Um, but that part of it, the getting really deep, probably helped with the
Oh yeah,
chemistry.
'cause- yeah. I would imagine it's very, it's not easy per se, but everyone understands how to, get into the mindset of a relationship because everyone's been in one to one degree or another. But like, you know, walking between the living world and being, beyond, most people don't have that experience. That's harder to, find. So if you can center yourself within, okay, here's these two characters, here's their relationship, I would imagine that's an easier starting point. And then, like you said, you trust Tara in the script and go, okay, I know that there's a vision here, and I can get into it. And it's interesting that you talk about it being like a therapy session because it is a job, and it's, people you become friendly with, but they are coworkers in a way. And usually you want to keep some level of like reserve with people you don't quite know as well. So it is interesting to be, okay, there's a lot of strangers here, but I'm also going to like open myself up in this very like emotionally naked way. So, hi everyone, you're about to learn all of my deepest, darkest fears. It's
But
such an
that's,
interesting challenge.
that's what acting is. It's such a
Yeah,
surreal experience. But you meet people often, like the first week of meeting an entire crew, and you're kind of naked, sobbing on a floor. Like
yeah,
there can't be too many layers between whatever your vulnerabilities are, and what you're willing to express, because that's what's asked of you. But
yeah.
it's not always that you meet someone who's willing to meet you there.
Oh yeah. And I mean, I think even in the last few years, you really do pick things that require you to, be emotionally and sometimes in a more even physical way, like raw and naked, and really go for the capital A acting, as opposed to, there's nothing wrong with like people who are like, I'm gonna be in this franchise because it's a paycheck and life is great and I like my houses. But you seemingly don't make those choices, which is always a cool thing to see. But what sort of guides your preferences and why you choose more challenging independent fare, or at least, at the current moment.
Yeah, I think the roles tend to be a little bit more interesting. I think I like that kind of cinema. It's what I watch.
Yeah.
I like the gamble of it. I like that it's not a sure bet. I've definitely hopped between like massive studio things and back again. And I think I would always want a balance, because something interesting happens when there's not a huge budget and it's a beautiful script, and it might work and it might fail. But I think everybody brings something to that that's magical, and there's no waiting around, and it's kind of guerrilla filmmaking often. You're like jumping out of cars and like grabbing that shot. And I think I get off on the adrenaline of that. There's something just innocent in it.
Yeah.
But I think I've also, like, I'm done with grief now. I think I've explored every aspect of that emotion for the time being, and I'm ready for some levity and tap dancing. And yeah.
Yeah. At a certain point, how do you also know that you've reached that point? Because there are definitely actors who, they do their one, like, I'm crying on the floor movie, and then I can't do that again. And then there are people who do it, 3 times a year for, every year because it's what they're good at. Like, how do you, because like you said, it is like therapy, and you kind of have to find the realistic place. If you know how to fake cry, eventually people will catch on. So you have to figure out how it's gonna resonate for you and the audience. Like, how do you know that you've reached that point where you're like, okay, I've given enough in that realm, and I don't want it to feel false? Because one of the best things about this movie is, for such a fantastical premise, at times it does feel like this is somebody's life, and you buy it immediately because it wouldn't work otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. I just think in terms of like losing someone, of that
Yeah.
kind of grief. But I think grief can manifest itself in so many ways. And I just said that statement, and then I realized the thing that I'm making now is, she has, no one dies, but there is a sense of grief. I think it's something that is never that far away from us, and they are interconnected, whether it's the loss of somebody, or the loss of a love, or the loss of what you imagined your life would be. There is something connected about that feeling. And so I probably will explore it
Yeah.
more. Um, but finishing Wonder Darkly, having done American Woman, and exploring that kind of loss, and sitting in that space of imagining, which is impossible not to do, but imagining if this happens to you or what that would be. It's heavy and it's painful and it's dark and it's imposing, and I'm actually quite light as a person, so I don't know why I keep going to these depths. Also, my mother is just begging me now to please stop doing these heartbreaking things.
Like
So
I want to take my friends to see these movies, and I can't do it when they're getting depressed.
exactly. Yeah.
It is interesting. You know, there's something to be said for every genre of film. But yeah, there's certainly, as you seem to get older, like I know my grandmother watches like a very select amount of things right now, and she'll, only sort of understands what I do. So I'll get a call and be like, The Prom is wonderful. But, she's not in such a hurry to be depressed. She's like, life is depressing enough. So there is a lot of that where even someone like you said, like your mom is like, she'll watch whatever you do, but I'm sure she would rather be like, my daughter's in this romantic comedy and everyone has a British accent and it's completely lovely.
At the same time, she sort of loves that, like, oh, she's really acting and she's
Yeah,
really worked so hard. And this movie actually, for all the kind of exploration of grief within it, I think there is something that's kind of life affirming about this one.
yeah.
Yeah.
And even just the last couple of years, and even being involved in American Sniper and American Woman, um, movies that get like Oscar buzz kind of gives it a whole new sort of realm to the work because your job is to go in and perform and make the characters realistic as possible and do the best job you can. And then for most actors, they kind of move on from it. You may do a little bit of press and then you go on vacation, you go to your next movie. But then when something catches buzz, there's this whole other wave of like, oh, more people want to talk to you about something you did a year ago or 2 years ago or 6 months ago, and or want to talk to you about someone else's work in the movie you're in, which is a weird thing to be asked about. Like, how do you go about that when you're like, I'm obviously proud of the work and I got paid and I had a good time. Like, all that's great, but I also am on to this other exciting thing that was made for a tenth of the budget, or has this other thing that I'm excited about. How do you balance that? Because I'm sure, like you said, you're working on something now. That's where your focus is. But at the same time, you're thinking back on an experience you had like a year ago.
I think if you give so much to the making of something, there's that kind of the goodwill for it or the desire for it to be seen or experienced or responded positively to, like that never goes. I don't think I used to think I just made stuff and my experience was all that mattered. I now understand much more deeply and that was probably self-protection. Like if everybody hates it, whatever, I had a good time. But
Yeah.
if people respond positively to something and want to talk about it, that's great. That's fantastic. And it's surreal doing it on Zoom, I guess.
Yeah.
That's one negative of this time. But the fact that, yeah, it's always a cherry on top of something. And you never know with indies, you never know how they're going to be received or what will happen to them, whether they'll ever come out. The
Yeah.
fact that Dr. Sundance and is being released is already a huge achievement. And anything on top of that is just great.
Yeah. And we've seen like releases change quick. Like it used to be, every couple of decades you would see a change in how, films came out. Like the 90s where the boom of, Sundance being a place where you could have a small movie come out and it would get bought for a lot of money and it would become a big deal. And now
Mhm.
we kind of have there's no real in between. There's the things meant to make $1 billion and the things that sort of are assumed won't make any money. Like they covered their budget in other means, and there really isn't that mid-level movie that I think is where you often got like a lot of the best acting. Like I
Yeah.
I I
Yeah.
sound like a broken record, but I always talk about Jerry Maguire was like $100 million movie and won an acting Oscar and was popular.
Yeah.
Probably cost like 30 or 40 million, maybe 50 with how much Tom Cruise could cost. Would never get made today. Like no studio would be interested in that movie because it's people talking.
It's so true. I don't know whether you've ever, I'm sure you have, but looked up the movies that came out in 1999. Have you ever
Yeah.
looked at that list?
It's
It's
yeah, there's a whole book on it being the best year for movies ever.
astounding. I mean, amazing movies, and all of those movies for those budgets, that kind of, like, it's really rare. Like, I miss that. I want that.
And,
That's like the sweet spot for me.
yeah, and the wild part is a lot of those failed. Like they talk about how many of those movies like didn't make their budget back and were seen as unsuccessful, and it took a couple of years, or it took, DVD was what rescued things for a while, and now that's not as big a deal. It's more whether it goes to a streaming platform and Netflix or Hulu or whoever gets it. And then I know I'm probably even for you, like it's a lot harder to find out if people saw it. You're not getting the same like report of, oh, we sold 3 million discs of this movie and go, oh, great, I guess people like it. You hear like, oh, it's doing well on Netflix. Well,
Yeah.
how well? Don't worry about it. Well, so there is like this mystery of like what people are watching because, to some degree, I'm sure you're guided mostly by what you want to do, for yourself and what's good for your career. But I'm sure if you knew that the last 6 things you did, people who were like, oh, I'm a Sienna Miller fan, were like, that's not what I like. That would probably be in the back of your head of like, oh, people like me don't want me to be in this. And you never know that anymore. You're just kind of like going with what you and your team and the industry is sort of presenting. It's not good or bad. It's just weird. It's different.
Yeah. I wonder whether I'd be influenced by that. I don't know that I would be either way. Um, but I definitely, yeah, yeah, there is, I guess, those big releases. I remember when American Sniper came out, and I was suddenly on an email chain with Warner Brothers, and it was like at the time the highest grossing art. It was so exciting having made tiny films.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but those days are probably gone too. Mm.
Yeah, that did feel like a surprise. And I imagine even for you, interesting because you're like, I'm glad to be on this chain, but I mostly held a fake baby and like told him to, protect yourself. Like I did my thing and I'm important to the movie, but I feel like like Bradley like produced it and like he's involved. Like maybe send him a couple more of the emails and just send me
He
the
was on
good
the
stuff.
email chain. Don't worry, he was on
Yeah.
that chain.
I'm sure he was probably thinking the same thing. He's like, I did all of these things. Bother her. Let her worry about all this stuff. I'm going on vacation. I worked hard on this.
It was more
Uh,
celebratory, but yes, it was. Yeah, yeah.
oh yeah. And then just as we sort of wrap up, like what you talked about sort of jokingly being done with grief, but like what is there something you haven't done that if somebody was just, a filmmaker you worked with or someone, you were in a position to produce was like, you can make anything you want. Here's a, blank check. What subject would you do? Is there a thing that's kind of been in the back of your mind of I would love to make this movie?
I'd love to be some sort of corset wearing, sword wielding, horse riding something.
Hmm.
That's fun. And I did cabaret on Broadway. I took over from Emma Stone in that show, and singing and dancing is like my happy place. So any kind of musical thing, I would be down singing and
Awesome.
dancing.
And then just to sort of end on a happier note, like obviously we've all been sort of struggling to stay sane and busy. Like what do you do to stay sort of centered and sane? Because obviously getting to work is great, but largely there's a lot of time spent at home. Like how do you make sure that you're not like getting cabin fever or getting worse cases of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading a lot. I'm reading Obama's book right now. I'm loving that. That's total transport. Oh, you are? Isn't it
Yeah,
great?
I got it from my grandmother, and it took forever for her to read it because it's too heavy. We had to buy like an easel type thing.
Fine of
Yeah,
it.
it, she joked it was a workout to read it.
Yeah. But that kind of escapism of books always gets me through. A bath, a glass of red wine, my daughter, Zoom school. Like there's a lot going on that is taking up time. Um, but I'm definitely a glass half full kind of person as the sirens go off in London.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, we'll get through it.
for sure. Well, again, like congratulations on the film. I really enjoy your performance in it. I think it's one of the more notable ones of the year or last year or a year. Time has lost all meaning. But I think it's one of the things that however someone ends up seeing it, they're gonna appreciate it and sort of if nothing else, be excited for like, oh, I want to see more because I think that's what American Woman really, really did in the last couple of years. Like I had one of my writers on staff texted me before the start just to tell you that he's holding your Oscar for you and he'll eventually give it to you when he's done with
Oh,
it.
that's so kind.
There's a thing when you make a smaller movie that connects with people that you there's this like passion for it that I don't know that necessarily exists when you make a thing that everybody sees and everybody goes, okay, it was good.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for, you
The
know,
underdog.
yeah, 10% of the people see it, but 99% of the people who saw it love it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Awesome.
Uh,
Well, thank you for doing this and congratulations again and stay safe and enjoy the red wine and sanity.
yes, you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.